Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is part 3 of our training workshop webinar for the Invasive Strike Force Survey program. This webinar is being pre-recorded for the actual webinar, which is taking place on May 9th, 2020. And we are now onto the category of invasive vines. And remember that vines are a category of plant that can't stand on its own, and we have a couple of common invasive species that we're going to be going over. The first of which is the dreaded Oriental bittersweet, which I'm sure many of you have seen along roadsides, taking down a lot of our native trees. It's a twining vine, and the stems of Oriental bittersweet are They twist around each other and around tree trunks as this way of climbing upward, which really distinguish it from some of the native vines that I'll show you in a video upcoming here. They clamber over everything, creating dense growths. Also, if you're trying to pull it up, you might see it as an orange root that's coming up. This is what the leaves look like. I'll show you a couple of different images of this, of how it looks like in nature, and how some of the new shoots compare to some of the older ones. But let's go back to our video series. You can kind of see what it looks like at this time of year and distinguish it from other vines in our region, namely poison ivy, which you can see right here.
Look-alike alert. What we are looking at here is poison ivy. And one of the ways you can tell is that poison ivy, especially as it matures, has a lot of hairs as it goes up the tree. You can see all that hairy structure to that. The invasive vines that we have, like Oriental bittersweet, don't have those hairs associated with it. Another telltale sign that is poison ivy, if I look at a younger vine that's coming up the tree here, are the 3 leaves that are coming off of it. Right now in early May, it's kind of got a reddish, greenish look to it, but definitely if it's got 3 leaves, stay away from it. This is what the younger vine looks like, and you can see that it's getting a little bit hairy, but nothing like the big mature vine that you see over here. You can also see that poison ivy has a lot of different growth structures to it. Look at this one that's coming off almost as a branch. And the way I can tell that's poison ivy is, again, by counting the 3 leaves. I can see what it's attached to. It's attached to this hairy vine here. One way to remember that is the phrase, "Don't be a dope and touch the hairy rope. Stay away from it." The other way to tell that it's poison ivy and not bittersweet is that bittersweet corkscrews as it goes up the tree. You see how poison ivy is just kind of, it's meandering a little bit, but it's not corkscrewing around this big tree. Oriental bittersweet will corkscrew up the tree and really kind of strangle it out. Poison ivy just tends to grow a little bit straighter, even though it can meander like a river. Here's a good
Before we get into that, I just want to also mention that the other phrase to remember of leaves of 3, let it be. That's another one. Now we're going to take a look at that corkscrewing behavior of Oriental bittersweet.
Close-up look of the vines of Oriental bittersweet. And the reason you can tell is it is actually a couple of different ways. You see how it's wrapping around this tree in a corkscrew fashion? So it's twisting and wrapping around, almost like a python that's going up this. It's actually can even wrap around itself. You might even see these dark knobs with, again, a couple of different vines that are wrapping around itself. Also, you will notice that it has a lot of dots on it. Now, it depends on the age of that vine as to whether you'll see those, but those are lenticels and ways of oxygen exchange inside and outside of the vine. And that's another distinguishing feature of it. You got to look, it's almost like dotted with those. But again, that depends on the vine. You can see that all throughout here, but you're really looking for that corkscrew pattern. I did want to point out that right below it is poison ivy, and again, poison ivy with the 3 leaves. So there's poison ivy going just below it here, but that's all that twistiness right there. That is classic of Oriental bittersweet. We are filming this right now at the beginning of May, and you can just see, like, even the branches that are coming out of this twisting vine here, you can see that the leaves are starting to form. And again, so this is what the leaf structure will look like. You can see that there's little teeth at the edge of the leaf. So that's another classic way to look at it. So, but as this continues to grow and the growing season comes on, you can see that those leaves are growing in clusters. These will open up a bit. And I'm just looking for almost like that oval shaped look to it. With a little, like the tip at the end. Whoops, if it comes back into focus. Yeah, you see this got like comes kind of to a point, but you're looking for the teeth on it. So the teeth on the edge, kind of growing out of this cluster here, but it's really that wrapping around like a big python that you're looking for. That distinguishes it from, say, poison ivy, which tends to meander, or even Virginia creeper that tends to meander as well. Look for that corkscrewing pattern. I also wanted to show you a younger version of bittersweet and what it looks like. You can see that the bark on the stem here is a little it's like reddish brown, and you can see that the lenticels on this are more white, or those bumps that you're seeing for gas exchange are white. You can see the leaf clusters again, and if you zoom in very closely, you can see that there are two little tipped points on the leaves. Okay, so when this starts growing out, you'll see that the leaves are arranged alternately as well. So they're not going to be opposite of one another as this begins to grow out. The other feature of the younger branches that I wanted to point out, we'll go over here, it's a little more obvious. So bittersweet, again, as a vine, is looking for something to wrap around, right, in that corkscrew fashion. So what you'll often see are these things that are called leaders. So you see how this is almost like, it's like a snake kind of perched up, like a cobra looking for something. It's sort of like the snake-like appearance. These leaders will come off of the main, off of the main stem, and be looking to wrap itself around something. You can see that this bittersweet here is wrapping around itself. So almost this corkscrew twisting around itself. You can see how it's all tangled. So this is what the younger version of bittersweet will look like. And I just pulled it off, but it was all actually about to wrap around this garlic mustard that you're seeing below me as well. So those are some of the features of the younger bittersweet. So more white lenticels. The bark is slightly different. Looking for these leaders, these almost like snake-like leaders that are looking for a place to wrap around. Very nefarious. Here's another good look at those leaders I was telling you about in another part of the forest that I'm in right now. You can see those like little branches. It's actually wrapping around itself, and you see how it's that snake-like appearance in the foreground and also the background of this plant. It's totally taken over here. There's another one that's coming down, again looking for to wrap itself around itself. You can see on this like fallen tree trunk or log or whatever this is, this is just a tangle of bittersweet. So you'll often see this kind of coming down to the ground and roots being established and then coming up and looking for purchase. But those are what the leaders look like. So that's another clear example of bittersweet. Here's another twisted mess. How do you disentangle this, the pun aside there, as to what we are looking at here? Well, a lot of it is bittersweet, but how can you tell? There's another vine in here that you may confuse it with. So again, if we're looking for the kind of the rougher bark here, looking for lenticels, this is mostly bittersweet that you're seeing here. But if you come over here, you'll see that the bittersweet is actually wrapping itself around something that looks slightly different. So you see this shaggier bark here. I can actually, so shaggy that I can peel it off. Well, this is what a grapevine looks like. They almost, you'll see them in a lot of the forests around here. They almost look like Tarzan swinging types. But this is what the native grapevines look like. You can pull off the bark. It's very stringy, okay? So this is bittersweet. Again, you can tell by the corkscrewing that it's doing around this grapevine here. Here's another grapevine, a slightly smaller version to it, but bittersweet is wrapping itself around this grapevine. A lot of what we're seeing in this picture is actually bittersweet, and again, I can tell by these leaves and see these leaf buds here that are coming off. This is just really early growth form in May, but you might confuse it with grapevines. But the way to tell is that sort of stringy bark on grapevines versus this bittersweet, which is a little bit rougher. Here is another vine look-alike alert. What we are looking at here is Virginia creeper, or five-leaved ivy, or five-fingered ivy, maybe. There's a couple of different names for it. But again, the way to tell the difference is you'll see that the leaf structure is actually quite different than poison ivy or bittersweet or some of the other invasive vines that you'll see here. This is not poisonous like poison ivy. You can pull it off the tree, although I would recommend using gloves pulling off any ivy off of the tree. But again, you're looking for the five-leaf structure to this, and Virginia creeper is native in the Northeast, and it is a vine that you might see on some of the trees around here, and is not to be confused with poison ivy or some of the invasive vines covered in this Species Spotlight series. Look for the five leaves, is most likely Virginia creeper. This is a burning bush look-alike alert.
Okay, we're going to stop there, and I'll actually show you why we're doing burning bush lookalike alert in a second here. But that really introduces almost any kind of vine that you might see growing on a tree, and how to really distinguish it, and how to tell what Oriental bittersweet is. And you know that's as many different lookalikes as you could possibly come across. You're looking for the corkscrewing, the dark bumps that are lenticels as it's corkscrewing around the tree. Again, the leaf shape, it can be pointier when young. You're looking at toothed margins on bittersweet. But as it gets older, you see how the leaves get a little bit rounder. So this is a couple variations you might see in leaf structure of bittersweet that are slightly different. But look for that corkscrew pattern and then the leaf shape of like the little teeth on the margins. The other vine, the next vine that's on our list for our invasive species is called mile-a-minute. And mile-a-minute is an herbaceous trailing vine which creates thick blankets over other vegetation. So it's not a woody vine like bittersweet was. And really, this is very, very easy to tell what it is. It's got a really highly distinctive equilateral triangle leaf shape. You can see it up close here, almost like a flat base to it, a really long leaf stalk that has these curved prickles on it. And really, it's almost like the pattern of an equilateral triangle. Is really not much like it out there. The only other distinguishing feature of it that I would point out is that at the end here, you can see like a round leaf-like stipule. So again, stipules are these features on some of the leaves that are kind of different and unique. It has this round leaf-like stipule on it that's like a little bit set apart from where the actual leaf is. So it's another feature to look for. In July, it actually has ripening berries that are actually quite neat to look at. They're almost like these bluish berries that ripen in July. You won't see that at the beginning of the fall. There's another look at that like equilateral triangle look to the leaves. And I just also wanted to mention that for a number of years, we had a mile-a-minute project in which we released what is called a biocontrol project, these little stem boring weevils that just fed on mile-a-minute. And they would create these little like leaf damage and also feed at the larval nodes of the leaf stalks. So it's just another feature and something that we were doing to try and to control the spread of mile-a-minute, which can really cause a lot of like highly dense forests. Actually go back and take a look. This high density of mile-a-minute just totally shading out a lot of the shrubs and just kind of an invasive mess when it gets in these dense stands. So, this weevil project was actually quite successful, and just you might see evidence of the holes of the weevil in action working on it. The only other thing that mile-a-minute might look like are bindweeds. So you kind of got that shovel-ribbed heart-shaped looks to it, but they don't have any thorns or prickles on the stems. And no ochrae or that round stipule like look to it. You also might find like tear thumbs, but you can see that the base of this is certainly not equilateral triangle. It's just much more elongated, and even though it has like some like kind of that thorns or prickles along the stem, there's no ochrae. There's none of that like rounded stipule on it. Our last vine inclusion here is a vine. It's a woody vine called Japanese honeysuckle, and it's a sprawling vine. It's actually found mostly in our region on the forest floor, though it will also climb. It just doesn't tend to climb as high as like say bittersweet does, or even like really mile-a-minute. They tend to be more found on the forest floor. The main feature that you're going to look for in Japanese honeysuckle, or the honeysuckle version, or the vine version of honeysuckle, are these opposite leaf structure along it. The more the stem alongside it happens to be, it's usually kind of reddish, but they almost like this opposite leaf structure almost looks like propellers or something on an airplane. And also it's very important to know that the flowers grow, these distinctive flowers that you might start seeing in the next month or so, also grow in pairs. So you got the leaves in pairs and also these flowers that grow in pairs. The only other thing that is like it is kind of the trumpet honeysuckle, but again, that's more of a cultivated one. You don't really see that out in the field very often. I do want to show you, even though Japanese honeysuckle, the vine version is not really growing in the late May, and I couldn't get a video of it. The bush honeysuckle version actually looks very, very similar. It just happens to be that bush honeysuckle, which is another invasive shrub in our region, grows and actually looks very similar to the vine version, which is on our ISF list. I'll
What
show
we
you
are
that.
looking at here is not burning bush, but in fact, it is bush honeysuckle. And if I zoom in, you can see why there is some confusion. First of all, if you see the leaves that are coming off of each of these branches here, you see how they're oppositely arranged, just like with burning bush. And it even has at the edge here that sort of like bunny ear look to it with the pointed tip at the end as well. But here's the main difference. Bush honeysuckle, if I look closely at the leaf, if you look at the margins or the outer edge of the leaf, you see how they are smooth.
So I wanted to point that out. The vine version also has smooth edges, so no toothed edges. So that's one thing to look for. And if you'll notice behind here, this sort of the reddish stem, and then you'll see some paired leaves. The vine version of honeysuckle is very similar in those
with
ways.
burning bush, you had the teeth at the edge or at the margins, right? So it had the tooth edge to it. Here in bush honeysuckle, it's nice and smooth. I also feel it feels a little hairier. You can also see that on the stem part too, right? And you can see that.
So again, the vine version of that has a little tiny hairs and this almost like reddish stem to it, and also these paired flowers that you'll see.
The flowers, which are going to be blooming in bush honeysuckle at the end of May or maybe early June, they come in pairs, and the flowers are actually going to look very different from the flowers in bush in burning bush as well. But if you wanted to know in early spring what the differences are, look at the outer edge margin. With bush honeysuckle, you've got the smooth margin.
So I use that as an example for like a look-alike for burning bush. But again, I wanted to show this in the Japanese honeysuckle version because the vines are not really apparent and early on in the spring. By May, you'll be able to recognize it and see it. But bush honeysuckles are out, and they actually are a good like ID guide for something to be on the lookout for, but just looking for more of a vine version, not something that grows as a shrub. Okay. Moving on, we are going to go to our herbaceous plants, and we are rounding the final turn here. So in terms of herbaceous plants, there's a couple to be on the lookout for. The first and probably most notorious of them all is Japanese knotweed. It's a very tall, stout, jointed stems to it, and really the stems have a very distinct, like zigzag appearance to it, which I will point out in the video upcoming. It tends to grow in very thick colonies and found in a lot of disturbed ground, primarily in sun, dry, or wet soil. Very adaptable. It's notoriously difficult to get rid of. And I wanted to show you in this video just what it looks like in some of the variations in nature. Then we'll come back to the PowerPoint to point out and again, reiterate those key common features of it.
And with burning bush, this, it's fierce competitive well. It is really very aggressive.
Start this over.
Honeysuckle, you've got the smooth margin.
We'll get to Japanese
bush,
knotweed in a second.
Teeth that are on the edges or margins of the leaves. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the most common and notorious invasive species in the lower Hudson PRISM region. It's Japanese knotweed. You can see that I'm holding it here, and there's a huge stand of it behind me as well. It is really very aggressive and is contributing to the loss of biodiversity in and around streams and roadsides like this. It's fierce competitor, extremely difficult to get rid of. But through early detection efforts and by learning some of its key ID features, we can make a dent on it and actually control its spread in areas in which we found it when in not high densities. We actually can do something about it. So let's zoom in and take a closer look at some of the key ID features to help with some of the reporting and control its spread in our region. One of the key identifying characteristics of knotweed are its oddly shaped leaves. You can see it here. It's almost like a shield shape, or the shape of a shovel, as people say. You can see that it's almost flat towards the back, or where the leaf stalk is, or the petiole is, and it's kind of got a pointed end, almost like the end of a shovel or something. You can also see next to it, it's got this like reddish, purplish, and green, almost like bamboo-like stem to it. And this is a really distinguishing characteristic of it. If I look at the bigger stand over here, you can see it's the way that it tends to grow in its growth pattern, especially as it tends to sprawl. You almost see like a zigzag like pattern to it. You can see it in this one here, where it almost goes like up and then to the right, then to the left. So that zigzag like appearance is another key characteristic of it. So you're looking for almost those bamboo-like stems, the reddish purplish stems as well, and the almost like shovel-shaped or shield-shaped leaves on it. This is these are all the distinguishing characteristics of it. It grows in these dense stands and just really very difficult to eliminate. It reproduces through rhizomes, and you can't see it under the ground here, but that's its primary means of reproduction and outcompeting just these dense stands that it forms. Native plants have a lot of trouble keeping up with it, and it spreads so easily, so got to be very careful when removing it. And during its first year of growth.
All right, that's going to be one of the last herbaceous species that we have in a second, but I just wanted to finish off with Japanese knotweed. It's found along streams. It's very good at reproducing any sort of fragment that you have coming off. It can start a new colony. And again, you're looking for that zigzag pattern, bamboo-like nodes, the reddish brown on it, flat base of the leaves. And the other thing to notice is that in late summer, you'll also start to see this flowering structure. It's actually visited by a lot of pollinators, and just another reason why it spreads just so fast and so well. It's just so difficult to get rid of, and definitely got to be on the lookout for to keep it out of our trail system and our natural areas. All right, second to last one is garlic mustard, which I'm going to show you in a bit. The only other thing I want to point out before we get to the field ID video is that it looks so different depending on what year you are looking at it. It comes in this form in its first year of growth. It's a biennial herbaceous plant that looks like this, and those are called rosettes, which I'll point out in the video. But by its second year, it bolts straight upright, and you'll start to see these white flowers, which are blooming right now in our region in May. And then eventually it'll lose those leaves towards the second year of its growth, and have this almost like this silhouette look to it. So with that, I'll show you some of the variations you can see and find in the field to help you with some of your IDs.
It's going to look like this. It could be about 2 to 4 inches off the ground. And again, these scalloped edges that you will see on it are the key identifying feature. If I touch,
that is what it looks like during its first year of growth. This is the rosette stage, scalloped edges to it. It's not very hairy, as I'm going to point out in this video here. Some of the other species that you might confuse it with might have a little bit of hair on it.
It's not very hairy. So that's a good way to tell from a lot of the lookalikes that you may confuse it with. Like if you look around here, you'll also see its second year of growth. So during the first year, it'll go from that like seedling phase to its rosette phase. Those rosettes will grow even larger. Then over winter, it might stay green. And then eventually it's going to grow into its second year. And its second year, it does something that calls bolts. So it bolts straight upwards. And as you can see, the leaves will start to actually take on a more triangular shape to it. So versus the rosettes, which you can kind of see that kind of the more rosette, rounded rosette.
I just wanted to point out that those other things that you're seeing there, which are more like flat, shovel-shaped or flat-shaped, those are seedling versions of garlic mustard.
It's more like this, like rounded, scalloped edges. But by year 2, it's going to start looking a little bit more triangular, and you can start to see the buds on top that are going to end up being the flowering part of that structure of the garlic mustard. And if you look around me, you can actually see some of the other second year rosettes that have started to bolt upright, just to give you an idea of scale and what that might look like. And actually, in a couple of weeks, you're going to start to see these turn white and those flowers on the top and in the clusters. They tend to grow as a single stem, but in disturbed areas, they can actually have multiple stems coming from one plant. And in a second, I will show you the siliques, or what ends up happening that once the leaves fall off and around midsummer, they start to get more of a stalk-like appearance to it. So just scanning the environment around us, we can start to see that there are some second-year growth patterns to garlic mustard, and then we can go back to the more rosette look of the first year of growth.
I'll pause it there and just also mention, I thought I had it in the video, but obviously if you grab this and you crush it up, it'll smell exactly like garlic. You can use it for cooking. And so that's why it's called and referred to as garlic mustard, and it was planted here to create that sort of industry that never really took off.
Finally, I wanted to show you the appearance of what garlic mustard looks like after it has lost its leaves. But this is actually a good look at the calyx, and that's more like stalk-like, the shape to it. And as it grows, this is what will hold the seeds and end up dispersing those seeds. But this is long after garlic mustard has already gone through its second year, has actually been through the winter. But you see these almost like ghost-like appearances of previous years around me. And then the more up and coming garlic mustard in the background mixed in with some other vegetation. But these stalk-like appearances are also garlic mustard after it has wintered, and it's sort of like that dead husk that's left behind.
If you end up surveying towards the end of the summer, late fall, this is maybe all you have left see of the garlic mustard that's left behind of the second year plants. So just be mindful that you may be seeing those stalks. But right now you'd be seeing it in
garlic mustard look-alike alert. What we're looking at here in the camera is actually violets. They are not garlic mustard. So even though it has the low-lying appearance of it and sort of those tooth edges, there's one fundamental difference. You can start to see that this shape of these violets are much more heart-shaped. They have a point at the end versus the more rounded nature of garlic mustard at this stage. So just that is one thing to be mindful of. Does it have a pointed edge? Then it might be a violet and not garlic mustard. Another look-alike alert. What we're looking at here is actually not garlic mustard, but is ground ivy. Ground ivy has that sort of like scalloped edge appearance to it, but it tends to sprawl out more sideways than garlic mustard. And you can see these telltale purple flowers that tend to come along with the ground ivy. As you can see to my left here, you can start to see garlic mustard in the scale. Garlic mustard tends to grow much taller. We'll have those, again, that take on in its second year of growth, almost that more triangular shape to it, versus ground ivy really tends to hug the ground and has just a slightly different growth pattern of the more sprawling appearance. Also, ground ivy tends to be formed more on grasses and lawns versus out in the forest.
Yeah, I mean, I was just out on my lawn the other day at the beginning of May, and yeah, I mean, ground ivy can grow up vertically a little bit, but again, you're looking for like more purple flowers, and it just doesn't bolt as much as garlic mustard does. So that's just another way to tell. So we went over some of the lookalikes, like the violet leaf, again, more heart-shaped, garlic mustard rounder, more scalloped edges, versus the ground ivy, purple flowers. And it does grow vertically, but just has more of a square stem, just doesn't grow as tall as garlic mustard does in its second year. And last but not least is Japanese stiltgrass, which is really devastating a lot of our forest understory, and I'm sure like also influencing a lot of your lawns and properties. One of its main key features is it does kind of look like it grows on stilts right now in the early spring. It's probably not, you can only just begin to see it at this point. And that's why we actually have to wait till towards the end of May to actually begin the survey season. You can find that stiltgrass, unlike other grasses, has a little shiny stripe down its middle, the middle of the leaf axis. It's very weak stemmed, it's easy to pull off, but it can form these very dense lawns and patches and really outcompete a lot of the native species that we're trying to protect. Probably right now, again, you're not going to see a lot of it in early May in the forest understory, but it will start sprouting out. You can look at last year's leaf litter to see kind of the remains of stiltgrass left behind and the kind of like the stalks that are left behind. But you really do have to wait till like end of May, June, before you really start to see it popping out in our region. There's not much you can confuse it with. Most of the grasses that you're going to see in the forest are sedges that grow a little bit more sparsely, and certainly not the dense, like sort of the density that stilt grass can grow in. There is a native white grass that you might confuse it with, but they have like hairy nodes at it. They grow tall like stilt grass does, with little tufts of hair at the nodes. But if you're looking at the actual grass itself, it has no silvery stripe down the middle. That's a way to tell it apart. So that's pretty much it, guys. Those are all the categories, the 14 invasive species that you're on the lookout for. And really, it just takes practice. And if you take the second webinar and decide to move forward and become a surveyor with us, you'll start to realize that like you'll have the ID books with you, or ID guides that I'll be providing to you. You'll have this training, and you'll also have these wonderful plant ID apps like called Seek and iNaturalist that really know these plants very well through image recognition software. They're super easy to use, and you guys can really do this. I feel very confident that everyone taking this training are equipped with the apps, a hand field guide that I'll provide to you, and this training. You are going to be good to go, and you'll start to learn so much about the world and plants around you. So in terms of the next steps, I will be in touch. There's going to be a follow-up webinar, a series of videos that will walk you through the field protocols we didn't touch on today. I mentioned the mobile apps, so get you all set up with those and how to record your locations. And once you've viewed and attended that second webinar, you will be ready for a field assignment. But again, prior to this field assignment, you're going to receive a full color field guide of all the species that we covered today. You'll receive, you'll be able to fully access this webinar and all the videos I created, and any future relevant webinars, just if you need to brush up on stuff before you head out to the field and start recording. You'll have access to our digital library that includes short 5-minute species spotlights, in addition to a lot of the field ID guides that I showed you in today's webinar. And of course, you're going to have access to me for questions anytime. In terms of other next steps, once you kind of have all those resources, I'll be passing those out in the next couple of weeks and giving you access to those. You have the field protocol webinar that you'll be attending. And once we get the go-ahead that the field survey season is ready to open up and it's safe to resume, you'll then start getting assignments. So the assignment is typically a 1 to 2 mile trail section. I will help you choose and work with you to choose a park that's convenient to you, that you're excited to go out and do the survey in. You're gonna have the full summer to complete that survey, and even parts of the early fall to complete it. Once you're done collecting that data, you're gonna submit that to us, and you know, what survey season is complete without a t-shirt? And many thanks and congratulations for us for being an awesome volunteer and becoming a citizen scientist with us, the invasive survey program. Excited to have you on board and doing whatever it takes to help you through that process and make you feel confident. So with that, this in the live version of the webinar, we'll take questions, and I hope that you enjoyed this webinar and feeling confident and ready, or at least taking the first steps to know, what you need to do to prepare, become a field surveyor with us. So thank you very much for tuning in, and certainly feel free to reach me with questions. Our email address is invasives with an S at the end, so invasives at nynjtc.org. Happy to answer any questions for you, and best of luck hunting and enjoy nature while you're out and about and trying to preserve our native biodiversity.